Old tales in the groves, forests, and meadows of Europe tell of a being beyond this realm, a symbol of the heart and embodiment of the old country. Hello, and welcome to episode 119 of the Planet Zoo Experience, and today we enter the Red Month. And by that, I mean for the next month, we're pretty much just going to be going over animals that have red in the name. This week, starting us off, is the red deer. Native to essentially the entire continent of Europe, the borderlands of Russia and Kazakhstan, the Elburz Mountains, and parts of North Africa, this is a big boy. It is essentially the European equivalent of the elk. Of course, the American version is much greater, with the red deer only weighing 350 to 530 pounds, and the elk usually weighing 377 to 1,096. But we're here for the red deer. So where does it come from? Well, I went over the evolution of the deer in more detail in the Pere David's deer video. God, that was so hard to say. Which came out not too long ago, so check out the link there if you are interested in more details. But just to cover our bases here, deers as an animal first evolved in the tropical areas of southern Asia, roughly 20 to 30 million years ago. They eventually would diversify, spread across the globe, yada yada, we all know that, but the red deer's line split off from the rest roughly 800,000 years ago. And its closest relatives are other large northern deer, like the Sitka or the previously mentioned elk. As a matter of fact, when Europeans first came to the New World, they thought the elk was a subspecies of red deer, and this thought actually continued until as recently as 2004. Seeing how they are able to breed together and create a viable offspring. Interestingly though, there doesn't seem to be a large amount of extinct deer that we know of that would be more related to the red deer than any other cervid in the game. So, I'll bring up the closest I can. The American mountain deer. An extinct deer species from the US that seems to be the middle child of the elk and the mule deer, which hailed from the Rocky Mountains. Now, there is a debate if the current subspecies of the Corsican and Barbary red deer are even the same species, because their genetic differences do seem to split as far as the elk, if not further. But the line between sub and species is always a challenging one. Something less challenging is finding this animal in the cultural records, because it is prominent. The oldest find we have dates back 40,000 years ago in the many cave paintings all across Europe. The next oldest actually comes, of all things, from a diet. Yes, as in 1991, a frozen man was found in the Alps, and he was discovered to have died 5,300 years ago. When examining his remains, scientists found that red deer was one of his last meals. This man is known as Otzi and is seen as the oldest body killed by another human being that isn't a buried skeleton. Moving ahead in our timeline is the mythologies and faiths that the animal features in heavily. And we've talked a lot about my favorite mythology while going over things like the ocelot or jaguar with Aztec mythology, but today, we get to enjoy my number 2, Celtic mythology. First and foremost, the Celtic people actually used to stretch out far beyond the British Isles, with their mythology and faith extending all across Europe, Iberia, and even some of them making their way to Anatolia. The red deer was a massive point in this religion. General consensus is that the old faith of the Celts was a druidistic or, in some ways, shamanistic form of spiritualism. Essentially, while they believed in a pantheon of gods, nature's spirit, or the force of nature, was a major part of the belief system. And what animal better suits as an emissary of the forest than the red stag? Fun fact, for some reason, male red deer are known as stags, while here in the States, we usually call male deer bucks or bulls if they're larger. This animal was often used as a spirit guide or even a messenger from the other side. Seems to be a trend with a lot of animals. But because of this, the Druids of Old Gaul were described as using the skulls of red stag as the base for ritualistic headdresses. They also saw it as a symbol of the god Cernunnos, an antlered god of fertility, the beasts of nature, and the underworld. Not much is actually known about him to this day, though interestingly, his cult seems to be one of the only ones not to get in some way incorporated into the Roman pantheon after the conquest. As well, there are many other myths and stories that this ancient Celtic god had been somewhat associated with, a decent amount of Irish ones for sure. Most, however, would be an after-the-fact conclusion that would be theorized long after these stories were written. While the divine position of the red deer had slowly fallen by the wayside, the great hind would not so easily leave the cultural zeitgeist. Long after the people of Europe dropped the knot and picked up the cross, the stag had become a symbol of royalty throughout the French, Germanic, and Celtic realms, often being associated with peace, dignity, and measured strength. Today, the symbol still kind of stands, though it is being used more commonly as a form of masculinity and empowerment. Though, as the future progresses, some people have reawoken a piece of the past. Cernunnos was revived. He essentially returned under the Wiccan belief system of the modern day, though has been given a more ominous yet culturally neutral term, the Horned God. Symbolizing nature, sexuality, and the hunt, as well as the male energies of the universe, Wiccans tend to practice a modern form of witchcraft that they believe can bend the energies of the universe. The antlers of a stag are revered for their solar and masculine energies in this purpose. This mysticism is something that has stuck with the red deer in more contemporary pieces as well, with it often being seen as a majestic animal and a white stag being essentially a straight-up living magical creature in the eyes of many people. With all those motifs in mind, it does make sense that J.K. Rowling would use a stag as Harry Potter's defensive ward. In the lore of Harry Potter, the Patronus spell is a defensive ward that usually takes the visage of an animal that is directly associated with the character in question. And the lead character, Harry Potter, supposed to be the savior and noble heart, has a stag as his representation. It truly is fascinating how almost immortal this animal is in our culture. From the moment we were able to draw on stone to the most influential piece of media of my childhood, and a divine presence that has escaped eradication and conquest to somehow reform in a day and age where faith seems to be a dying mentality. It makes you think, perhaps there's more to this beast of the forest. And maybe I was just a little too harsh on this creature at the beginning of this video. Something to think about. Well, as you do, I will give you your average outro. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. If there's anything you'd like to add, feel free in the comments. And until next time, go outside, touch grass, hug your loved ones, drink water. Bye-bye.